So ignorance, right? In Buddhism we have this concept, ignorance, and I feel like it's often misunderstood in the sense of people mistake it to mean cognitive ignorance, as in not conceptually knowing, but in actuality it's seeing in the moment of its arising things as they actually are. That's why the uprooting of ignorance in the Nikayas is a gradual process, because it is not done cognitively, but by cultivating mindfulness and investigation, yoniso manasikara, that ignorance gets uprooted. So when something is seen clearly, ignorance in that particular domain is uprooted, right? And since there's a lot of emotions, thoughts, patterns, past momentum, conditioning, fetters, wrong views to see through, that means that the uprooting of said ignorance is gradual. First of all, because mindfulness is usually not continuous. We also have these things called the 5 hindrances, right? Insight is basically seeing something as it really is. I'll give you an example. So, the 5 aggregates, for example, right? Or no, I'm gonna make it even simpler. Let's remove the term 5 aggregates. Just, I'm walking on my street and I look at my car. So, for most of the time, so what would be a ignorant way to see it? It's, you looked and you're like, that's my car, right? That's ignorance. What seeing it as it actually is means is you have mindfulness, right? You're mindful and your mind is of a nature to investigate, right? So when your attention moves to the car, it is seen, the movement of attention. When contact with the car happens, you see it. The moment of contact is known, and said contact produces a pleasant feeling that is also known. So you see, attention moved, contact with car, pleasant feeling arose, and then a perception is there, my car, and the mental formation, a feeling of ownership, right? So ignorance is just taking the appearance. Oh, this is my car. It's just how the system doesn't know about itself, the 5 aggregates. And seeing through ignorance, so seeing clearly, uprooting ignorance in that domain. For example, my car is, when it's happening, exactly when it happens, because mindfulness has been cultivated, because the teachings have been memorized and understood to some degree, because attention is conditioned to notice certain things, because its rad maybe try to notice moment of contact, so attention is wisely attending to experience, and mindfulness allows that. When the moment of contact with the car happens, you don't miss it. You see the whole chain play out. You see contact, pleasant feeling, perception, mental formation, and it's known. So you see there's a small gap between contact and you knowing of the contact, but you can remember seeing that you already had contact before you knew of the contact, because in the moment contact still happens. You still looked at the tree and it took a little bit for me to perceive it as a tree, but I saw the moment I looked before the perception arose. That's why mindfulness is one of the conditions for seeing That's why meditation helps, because only a collected mind can pay attention to such small movements of attention and feeling and perception, right? Information and consciousness. While most minds, they just take it at face value. This is my car, I like it. See, there's self-view, wrong view, right? Self-view, that drops off at stream entry. You know, my car, if you, like, you could see the perception my car arising, then it's not appropriated. You just seen its dependent arising. You saw contact, feeling, perception. You saw how it happened due to contact. If you didn't make contact with the car, that perception would not arose. You saw how conditions arose it in the moment. So it's not appropriated. There can still be a perception my car, but if you just see it and you're like, that's my car, that's appropriation. And what did the Buddha say? If things are seen clearly, they are not to be regarded as me, mine, or myself. So when in the moment of contact you see the whole sequence clearly, or let's say the sequence is seen, when the sequence is seen, appropriation does not happen, right? Ignorance in that particular moment is weakened. Not yet uprooted, but that particular domain of mistaking the car to be actually yours, when you clearly see that mechanism a bunch of times, that particular ignorance gets uprooted. That's why it's gradual, because nirvana is the uprooting, slow uprooting of ignorance due to seeing causes disenchantment, which causes dispassion, which causes a fading, a cooling of sensuality and other formations, and eventually a letting go. And when full cessation happens, that's what nirvana is, an ending. So it's not a state, it's an ending of a process that was only perpetuating itself due to ignorance, which is in the moment of arising not seeing the dependent origination of said arising. And that's how ignorance is uprooted gradually. And even the Buddha, he didn't do it instantly, but he didn't do it like a disciple, because disciple is led by the Buddha. But the Buddha himself had to discover the whole system himself, like seeing ignorance in action. So for him it took, like, he was in wrong view for years. He was an ascetic. That was wrong view. He acknowledged this and then started eating. And then when he decided he's gonna see, it didn't happen instantaneously. He just sat there until the whole mechanism was seen clearly, because he was establishing mindfulness and investigating things. And when he understood the mechanism completely, he saw the defilements. He saw how all of these current conditions arose from past causes. And he understood, in this life I did this and arose here because of this. In this life, due to this, that arose. Due to that, this ceasing, that ceased. Like, he saw conditions conditioning more conditions and causes. And that's when that knowledge is brought to its peak understanding, when ignorance has been fully uprooted in understanding of conditionality, then past lives are understood. That's the first knowledge. Then he kept watching and he saw how so the second knowledge comes out of seeing how this conditions that. Like, if I hit my hand on a tree, right, with this, there's a sound. You see sound, and you see how sound arises: ears, contact, perception, feeling, perception, mental formation, consciousness. So he basically saw to its full extent how things condition each other. That's why he said, people who know, when one does this happens. When one does these 5 things, he winds up in this place, in that place. He basically saw how things arise and cease due to conditions. First for himself, that is the first knowledge, and then for others, that is the second knowledge. And when those two are brought to fruition, they arise as an understanding of past lives and as understanding of beings passing and coming due to their karma. And then the third knowledge, he saw clearly, because mindfulness was established, investigation was established, non-appropriation was established, there was just conditioned investigative mindful seeing, right? He saw the defilements arising and passing. And what does that mean? Well, the fruition of that knowledge is seeing the dependent origin of the defilements, understanding their root, and seeing that they cease. So the Four Noble Truths, basically, seeing each, same for dukkha is the same for defilement, seeing greed, arise, seeing it has an origin, seeing it has an end, and knowing the path to its ending. And the knowing the path to its ending is seeing the dependent arising clearly. That shows that it's not you, yours, or yourself, so me, mine, or myself. And that doesn't fuel further arising of that process. It naturally ceases. Just like when you stop adding wood to a fire, it naturally ceases. When you blow a bubble, it eventually pops. Everything that arose due to conditions ends when the conditions end. And the only reason rebirth and becoming and suffering keeps happening is because the conditions for its arising keep getting refueled. Because everything requires maintenance. If you want to be alive, you have to keep eating, right? Everything requires nutriment, but eventually decays and dies. So because this is an impersonal process maintained by not seeing clearly, ignorance, right? Not seeing the impermanent nature, the unsatisfactory nature, the not self nature, not seeing dependent origination, not seeing the Four Noble Truths, right? When that is not seen, ignorance remains. That's why you have 4 stages, because a stream enterer has seen through self-view, belief in rites and rituals, and has gone beyond doubt in the Sangha, but he has not yet seen through sensual desire, through ill will, through restlessness, through desire for form realms, through desire for formless realms, through conceit. That's why ignorance, the final fetter, has not yet fully dropped. And that's why it's gradual, and that's why instantaneous awakening is not a thing. Even if it seems instantaneous in the moment, prior causes and conditions have been unfolding for that instantaneous awakening to happen. So it's not instantly accessible. Some people genuinely have to cultivate concentration, mindfulness, wise investigation, familiarity with the teachings. In fact, I think everyone needs to cultivate that, because a lot of people claim to be arahats or enlightened, but then they still indulge in sense pleasures. They still become. They still interact on, like, I'm not an arahat. I wouldn't be posting these videos if I was an arahat. I would probably just be chilling. I wouldn't have no mental movement to do so. I mean, that's not completely true, but I would probably be at least a monk, or like, I believe you can become arahat as a lay person, but I believe it's very rare and requires very specific conditions. And even then, the arahat would most certainly immediately go forth as a monastic. Like, there's no actual value to be gained in lay life ultimately, right? You can have merit, compassion, you can be caring, but for the final goal of full cessation, lay life just has you maintaining responsibilities which don't conduce to fully stopping becoming. Becoming has to be stopped by not adding fuel, which means just kind of sitting it out and seeing it clearly while it's burning out. And that requires a certain amount of seclusion from distraction. That's why only non-return is technically possible. Yeah, that's about it. Thanks for watching. See you in another video.